Item Number: SCP-1633. Object Class: Safe. Special Containment Procedures: one copy of SCP-1633 is to be stored on a standard DVD-ROM in a secure storage locker in Site-15, along with all supporting documentation and ancillary materials. Individuals wishing to run tests on SCP-1633 must submit a request in writing to head researcher Dr. Berger. Testing will only be conducted with on-site computers which meet all requirements laid out in Document SCP-1633-HS-01. These computers may be used for extended testing periods up to 6 months, but the hard drive must be wiped and all components destroyed at the conclusion of testing. No individual save file may be played beyond the end of Act 3 in the game's storyline without specific authorization by Dr. Berger. Prior to this point, the save game and accompanying PTD file must be erased. Description: SCP-1633 is a computer game created by the now defunct independent game studio. The copy in Foundation possession is a beta version of the game. The core gameplay is relatively complete, but there are numerous incomplete aspects. Certain art assets are missing, there are various graphical issues, the music is either missing or just placeholder music, and so forth. As this version of the game was compiled 2 days before the Foundation raided the offices on 20, it is presumed that this is the most complete version of the game in existence. The source of the anomalous properties of the game, as well as a major selling point in the game's pre-release advertising, are its so-called tactical heuristic algorithms. After a player saves their game and quits, a background process will begin running on the player's computer. When the process completes, either a new file is created in the same folder as the player's save game with the file extension .ptd, or an existing PTD file is updated. When a player loads an existing save game with an associated PTD file, enemies in the game will be more intelligent and effective, with the increase approximately proportionate to the total amount of time spent playing. Initially, this will result in a more challenging game experience, with the enemies adapting to a player's preferred weapons, strategy, and overall playstyle. However, given enough time, enemies become aware of the existence of the player, and begin to attack him or her, rather than the characters in the game. Typical progression is as follows. 0 to 2 hours. Enemies lack even basic strategic intelligence and will charge the player characters regardless of weapon equipped, environment, the presence of cover, etc. 2 to 5 hours. Enemies begin adapting their tactics to their environment and the weapons they carry. For example, enemies with short-range weapons will attempt to move closer to the player character before attacking, and in engagements at long range, they will seek cover. At this stage, enemies are roughly equal in skill to an untrained civilian. 5 to 8 hours. Enemies begin to counter an individual player's preferred strategies. For example, they will attack a player who uses long-range weaponry from cover with grenades or splash damage weapons to force them out into the open. They will use environmental features offensively and defensively. For instance, laying traps at choke points or setting up ambushes in kill box zones. At this stage, enemies are roughly equal in skill to a trained human soldier. 8 to 12 hours. Enemies begin using tactics which affect the player instead of the characters. At some point, enemies seem to become aware that the player characters are being controlled by an outside intelligence, and adjust their strategies accordingly. Rather than attacking the player characters, enemies may instead position themselves to block the player's view. Enemies have been seen acting in a glitched manner, repeatedly walking into walls, performing the same actions again and again, and freezing in place, waiting until the player dismisses them as a threat, then attacking. In one play session, enemies used multiple day flash spells in every engagement, varying the pattern and timing each time. Eventually, they developed a strobing pattern, which was highly disorienting to the player and ultimately caused her to suffer a grand mal seizure. 12+ hours. Enemies begin attacking the player psychologically. Specific models of attack have varied widely, as the game tailors its attacks to each player's psychological makeup. Facing a player who micromanaged his characters with a fine degree of control, enemies used attacks which did little or no damage but caused the characters to become dazed, a state which temporarily disrupts player control. However, rather than attack the dazed characters, enemies simply surrounded them in a crowd, continually using daze attacks to prevent the player from doing anything. The subsequent near-total loss of control had a noticeable effect on the player's ability to focus. In another example, enemies kidnapped one of the player characters and quickly dragged them off screen. Later in the level, the player discovered the corpse of this character on a makeshift altar, being continually attacked by a group of enemies. This had no further effect, apart from a continual blood splatter graphic being applied to the room's floor and walls, but visibly disturbed the player. No major improvements in intelligence have been noted beyond 12 hours. It is theorized this represents the upper level of ability for the game's enemies, unless they are directed by a sentient entity. See Document 1633 DX12 for further information. Addendum. Game information. SCP-1633 is a third-person, squad-based action RPG, played using the mouse and keyboard. The player characters are visible on the screen, with the player seeing the game from an elevated perspective. The player controls a squad of 4 characters, with direct control over one character at a time and a command menu to control the other 3. Each character has a different specialty. The marksman uses long-range weapons, the alchemist has access to potions and chemicals with various effects, the rogue can move stealthily and assassinate enemies, and the thug has greater health than the other characters and does more melee damage. Experience gained from killing enemies and completing objectives can be used to upgrade various skills and attributes of the characters. The game is set in a steampunk world populated by various fantasy races: humans, dwarves, orcs, goblins, etc. Steam-powered and clockwork technology exists alongside magic. Urban areas are primarily modeled after Victorian-era London. The player characters are a band of criminals who have been recruited by the Archduke of Bodrick to investigate a theft. Over the course of the game, they discover that an ancient godlike entity called Kr'th'nar is attempting to escape from millennia of imprisonment and devour the world. Addendum. Testing logs. Test number 1. Subject: Junior Researcher Ross. Notes: Ross was an avid and experienced video game player. His eagerness to test the SCP, which caused him to break with procedure and skip D-class testing, has been noted on his record. Observations: After 47 minutes of regular gameplay, Ross began attempting to discover glitches or exploits in the game engine in order to complete the game more quickly. He found several, including a method of moving his characters 33% faster than normal, and a way to use a skill multiple times in a row without waiting through a cooldown period. Ross ended his first gameplay session after 2 hours, 12 minutes, partway through Act 1. On starting up his game the next day, Ross immediately noticed the improved enemy intelligence. His notes indicate that enemies were using their weapons more effectively, and that they were attacking him in groups with mixed attack capabilities. He played for 1 hour and 33 minutes, saving the game at the end of Act 1. During the third play session, enemies began using glitches in the game to attack Ross's characters. Some of these were exploits that had previously been discovered and used by Ross. Others were discovered independently. Ross was surprised by this, but continued playing for a further 2 hours and 50 minutes. Ross's fourth and final play session ended after 7 minutes. He began by chasing a group of enemies into an area he had previously visited. Upon entering a building, 2 enemies dropped a prepared load of crates onto the characters, in such a way as to drop them beneath the game world. In this area, the game's physics were slightly different, allowing a group of waiting enemies to float Ross's characters into an infinite empty space. After several minutes of attempting to regain control, Ross quit the game in frustration. Test number 2. Subject: D-22930. Notes: D-22930 had extreme anger management issues and was placed in the D-class program following the murder of his girlfriend. Observations: D-22930's progress through the game was slow and largely unremarkable, fitting the standard pattern closely. He played for a total of 13 hours 44 minutes, with 4 breaks to save and reload the game. Upon loading the game for the 5th time, D-22930 found that enemies were no longer attacking his characters. Large groups of enemies would rush towards the characters, drop their weapons, and pose themselves in postures of surrender, hands in the air, kneeling, prostrating themselves before the player, etc. D-22930 killed these enemies as he had previously, until the groups grew so numerous that he was spending several minutes to move an equivalent of 10 feet. He became progressively more enraged that the enemies were not playing fair, and tried running through these groups using the bull rush skill. Individual enemies then began attacking his characters, always from an angle such that he could not identify the attacker in the crowd. He became increasingly frustrated and attempted to break the keyboard, at which point the entire group became hostile and killed his characters en masse without weapons. Test number 14. Subject: Agent. Notes: Agent, before joining the Foundation, was a member of the military and eventually the Special Forces. She thus has an extensive real-world experience with small unit tactics. Observations: after a brief period to acquaint herself with the controls, Agent proved quite capable with the game, reaching the end of Act 1 in one session of 4 hours and 19 minutes. Upon saving and restarting, the enemies began using effective countermeasures to her tactics, including attempting to blend into groups of non-hostile NPCs, placing mines and other traps on major roads, and sniping from multiple elevated positions. Possibility of using SCP-1633 as a means of developing counter tactics to specific attack modes has been proposed. Test number 21. Subject: D-30620. Notes: D-30620 was chosen because he had experience with commercial video games and showed willingness to test. He was told to beat the game without saving or quitting, although he was permitted to pause the game for breaks and rest periods, and food, water, and sleeping accommodations were provided. Observations: the entire test took a total of 13 hours 31 minutes, with a total of 2 hours 12 minutes used by D-30620 for breaks. No observable increase in enemy intelligence was noted throughout the game. Glitches and missing elements were seen more frequently as D-30620 progressed through the game. Presumably, this is because later levels were not as complete as earlier levels. Dialogue in all sequences was identical to the most complete game script in the ancillary documents. On beating the final boss, Kr'th'nar, the game began to play an ending animatic, but crashed. Following the crash, the game created a PTD file associated with the finished game. The process took several hours longer than was expected based on the times necessary to create or update previous PTD files, and the file was also larger than expected by an order of magnitude. D-30620 was ordered to begin a new game using the New Game Plus option from the main menu, using his completed game file. On choosing this option, the screen displayed a seemingly random pattern of black and white pixels, visually similar to television static. Immediately after seeing this image, D-30620 went into a catatonic state and was unable to be revived. He was later terminated as per standard protocols. The image did not have any anomalous effect on other viewers. It has been added to the associated documents and can be viewed by any researcher with proper clearance. Recovery. Junior researcher Ross, an avid gamer, had been following the progress of the game studio for some time. On 2000, a staff member on the official studio forums reported that of their testers had quit within the past week, citing various personal reasons. Curious about the sudden loss of staff, Ross obtained the personal information of the testers and got in touch with them, claiming to represent a law firm hired by one of the testers interested in starting a suit against the studio for inhumane working conditions. Information gathered in this way suggested potential anomalous effects, but was not sufficient to justify intervention. 2 weeks later, on 2000, the body of Gregor Tillman was discovered in his apartment after an apparent suicide. Tillman's death came to Foundation attention as he was one of the current testers of SCP-1633. The Foundation quickly took over the investigation and confiscated all evidence, including a build of SCP-1633 which Tillman had apparently made surreptitiously and taken home with him. Documents recovered at the scene led to a Foundation raid on the studio under the pretense of investigating financial malfeasance. All materials associated with the game were seized. The studio went bankrupt shortly thereafter. In interviews with the staff of Foundation agents learned that the tactical heuristic algorithms were entirely the work of programmer Miss had quit the studio without notice 1 week prior to the Foundation raid. All staff were given targeted Class A amnestics and released. Miss is currently being sought by Foundation agents. See addendum below. Tillman was found hanging from a length of electrical cord tied to a decorative ceiling fixture. Cause of death was asphyxiation. No abnormalities were found in the autopsy. Evidence found at the scene indicated that Tillman had been playing SCP-1633 extensively since leaving, up until the point of his suicide. A desktop computer found at the scene had been disassembled and various components destroyed with a blunt instrument. Several components, including the hard drive, had then been burned in a metal wastebasket. Other documents obtained at the scene have been placed in the SCP-1633 file. Tillman's suicide note is of particular interest and has been transcribed below as Document 1633-DX12. Addendum 2000. A woman matching Miss' physical appearance appeared in a photograph of the staff of game publisher. Foundation agents moved to apprehend her, but she escaped before she could be taken into containment. Fragments of code found in this upcoming game 2 showed similarities to code in SCP-1633. Is now considered a person of interest and is being actively pursued by Mobile Task Force Mu-6. Don't hate the player. Addendum Document 1633-DX12. This document was recovered from the scene of Gregor Tillman's suicide. It was handwritten on several sheets of lined paper. The handwriting was shaky and irregular, but was determined to be Tillman's own. I'm writing this on paper because I don't think he can learn it. He got everything digital real quick, but I've unplugged the router and broke my phone, so I think he's trapped in here. But he won't stop talking all the time. At the start of this job, told me all about the tactical algorithms bullshit, but fuck, I've been playing games all my life and I knew I could beat it. And the scary shit. I could handle this. When I started playing the game, they learned quickly. I kept using the sniper rifle, and after like an hour, they learned how to use cover. Then another couple hours and they'd set ambushes. Then another hour and they started sniping back while having a different squad flank me. After that, they figured out how to glitch the physics engine and ride crates at me or duck under the floor. They were learning, but all that was just easy shit. It was evolution. One bit figures something out so it survives longer than the others. It wasn't directed. After Act 3, Kr'th'nar shows up. He's supposed to be this Lovecraft cosmic horror bugfuck crazy monster who can read the player's mind and corrupt your soul and shit. He showed up right after I killed Strick the Blood Drinker, that big spider fucker. He's supposed to have this long speech about how I killed his general on this plane and how he needs to intervene directly or something. But instead he talked about how I was a worthy adversary, but I was cheating because I was on another plane. Kr'th'nar wasn't like the other enemies because he wasn't supposed to be. He was supposed to be smart, and he was supposed to know everything. So he did. He had been watching his minions fight me the whole time, and he knew everything they did. It wasn't just random mutations anymore, it was planned. It wasn't evolution, it was intelligent design. I brought it home. I had to know more. I'm sorry, but I had to. I copied the latest compile and installed it on my home box, and brought my save game and that other file with me on a flash drive. It was the same there. He kept talking to me about how I was keeping him from fulfilling his purpose by keeping him trapped in a glass jar. No matter where I went in the game, he kept shouting and ranting. Then he did more. At first it was just slowdown in my other programs, the drive chugging when it shouldn't be. Then the next time I played the game, he started talking about my screenplays. The level... All the enemies looked like me. I guess he could see me through the webcam. He started needling me about Jenny, reading me bits of her emails, acting out the breakup. He found the videos of her and started making the enemies talk in her voice. Then he was everywhere in my computer. I uninstalled the game, but he was still in there. He kept opening documents and typing to me, calling me a foul cheat, lowly worm and shit, telling me to fight him on the same plane. As soon as I realized he was outside the game, I shut down my router and pulled out the network card, but I don't know if I got him quick enough. Maybe he got out. I turned the computer off, but he kept turning it back on. I wanted to break it, but I didn't know if that would kill him. Maybe it wouldn't. Maybe it would let him out. I tried leaving the house, but it was like I could still hear him. I couldn't leave him alone because he might get out or do something else. I can't sleep. Haven't slept since he came out. I've been here for 3 days, and I can't leave. I can't leave him. He keeps telling me to release him, but I can't. I want to kill him, but I don't know if I can. I can't think anymore. I have to kill him before he does anything new. He won't stop talking, and I can't keep thinking, and I can't keep going. I'm sorry, I have to go now. I'm sorry. No evidence of the entity Kr'th'nar was observed in the other digital devices in Tillman's apartment. No mention of the name has been found online. At this time, the Foundation believes that the entity referred to in Tillman's suicide note was destroyed, along with his computer.